While American soldiers freeze to death in foxholes at Bastogne, while artillery shakes Europe during the Battle of the Bulge, something extraordinary and almost unbelievable is happening in the Arizona desert. More than 3,000 German prisoners of war captured across North Africa and the Atlantic are living behind barbed wire just outside Phoenix. They are well fed, they play soccer, they read American books, and they are convinced none of it is real. They believe the food is propaganda. They believe the photographs of the Grand Canyon are fake. They believe America itself is exaggerating its power to break their morale. Then, in the winter of 1944, 25 of them decide to escape, to prove that the abundance surrounding them is a lie. What happens next will shatter everything they believed about America and quietly convince some of them that Germany has already lost the war.
Camp Papago Park sits quietly in the Arizona desert just east of Phoenix. From the air, it looks unremarkable. Rows of barracks, guard towers, fencing. But by late 1944, it holds 3,069 German prisoners of war, the largest POW population west of the Mississippi. Most were captured during the collapse of the Afrika Korps in North Africa. Among them are hardened U-boat sailors, Luftwaffe airmen, and experienced officers. The camp is run under the Geneva Convention, strictly, deliberately. The prisoners receive adequate housing, medical care, and rations equal to American soldiers stationed nearby. To many Germans, this alone feels suspicious. Back home, cities are rubble. Food is rationed. Bombs fall nightly. Yet here in Arizona, enemy prisoners eat white bread, meat, and vegetables regularly. To them, it feels impossible. So they reach a conclusion that seems logical in wartime Germany. This must be propaganda.
Among the prisoners is Captain Jürgen Wattenberg, a decorated German naval officer and former U-boat commander. Wattenberg is intelligent, disciplined, and deeply ideological. To him, America's treatment of prisoners is not kindness, it is psychological warfare. He tells the men, the food is staged, the libraries are curated, the photographs of massive canyons and endless rivers are exaggerations, even fabrications. No country at war on two fronts could possibly live like this. Wattenberg becomes convinced that the ultimate way to expose the lie is simple: escape. And when he speaks, men listen. Over the summer and fall of 1944, under their barracks floor, prisoners begin digging, slowly, quietly, using stolen tools and makeshift supports. By December, the tunnel is 178 feet long. They call it Der große Flucht, the Great Escape. On the night of December 23, 1944, 25 German POWs slip through the tunnel and vanish into the Arizona darkness. Their plan is bold and deeply flawed. They believe Arizona rivers flow year-round, as shown in books. They believe they can float down the Salt River, then reach Mexico. 3 men even construct a collapsible boat inside the camp, but none of them understand the desert. Within hours, reality sets in. The Salt River is dry, not low, but completely empty, just sand, rocks, silence. Others walking south find creek after creek with no water at all. By the next morning, men are dehydrated. By nightfall, exhausted. Within 21 hours, most are voluntarily surrendering, knocking on farmhouses, approaching police, or simply waiting to be found. America was not lying.
They just refused to believe it.
One escapee does not surrender quickly. His name is Werner Krauss, a young German sailor, not an ideologue, not an officer. For nearly 6 days, Krauss moves cautiously through the desert, avoiding roads, sleeping in the cold, rationing what little water he can find. He does not return because he is captured. He returns because of a piece of paper. Back at Camp Papago Park before the escape, Krauss had seen the Christmas menu posted on a bulletin board, a routine notice almost ignored at the time. Roast turkey, mashed potatoes, vegetables, 3 kinds of pie. Out in the desert, dehydrated and starving, the memory refuses to leave him. Not because he misses comfort, but because the menu suddenly feels impossible. Germany, in December 1944, cannot feed its own civilians this way. Yet America claims it will feed enemy prisoners like this during wartime. On the 6th day, Krauss turns around. He walks back into the camp alone. Christmas morning arrives quietly at Camp Papago Park. There are no speeches, no decorations meant to impress, just food, exactly as promised. Roast turkey is served, real turkey, mashed potatoes, vegetables, pie. For Krauss, the realization is immediate and devastating. This is not propaganda. No cameras, no visiting journalists, no audience. Just logistics and abundance. Across the Atlantic, cities burn, soldiers freeze, families ration scraps. Yet here, America is feeding 3,069 enemy prisoners better than many German civilians. Krauss later recalls the moment with brutal clarity. If a nation can do this, quietly, routinely, while fighting a 2-front war, then the outcome is no longer in doubt. Germany has not just lost battles, it has lost the capacity to compete. The Great Papago Escape is officially over. All 25 escapees are recovered, some within hours, others after days of wandering. There are no beatings, no executions, no reprisals. The camp commander, Colonel Lewis K. Holden, files his report. The escape is embarrassing but revealing. The prisoners did not fail because the plan was poorly designed. They failed because their assumptions were wrong. They believed maps instead of climate, ideology instead of observation, doctrine instead of reality. Ironically, the escape has the opposite effect than intended. Instead of weakening discipline, it quietly breaks resistance. Men who once dismissed America as theatrical now begin to reassess everything: the food, the order, the silence of prosperity. Something doesn't need to be exaggerated to be overwhelming. In January 1945, Colonel Holden makes a quiet decision. He authorizes a supervised trip for selected prisoners, including escape participants, north to one location they still privately doubt: the Grand Canyon. The journey is long, cold, silent. When the trucks stop, the men step out and walk forward. There is no fence, no stage, no angle that explains it away. Just scale. Depth beyond comprehension. Stone carved by time, not cinema. Some prisoners say nothing. Others simply stare. Years later, several would say this moment ended the war for them, not emotionally, but intellectually. The canyon doesn't argue, it doesn't persuade, it just exists. And with it, the final collapse of the belief that America's abundance was fake. While German prisoners stand at the edge of the Grand Canyon, the war shows no mercy elsewhere. In Europe, December 1944 turns into January 1945 under relentless cold. At Bastogne, American paratroopers of the 101st Airborne Division fight surrounded, under artillery fire, short on food, short on ammunition. Across the continent, cities like Cologne and Dresden wait under air raid sirens. The contrast is absolute and unsettling. The POWs in Arizona are not ignorant of this. Many were frontline soldiers only months earlier. For the first time, some begin to recognize the disparity not as luck, but as capacity. America is not strong because it stages abundance. It is strong because it can sustain war and humanity at the same time. This realization spreads quietly through the camp. Not spoken aloud, but understood. After January 1945, something changes inside the camp. Attendance at English classes increases. Prisoners borrow books, not to mock them, but to understand them. Some attend lectures on American law and civic structure, offered routinely in POW camps under Geneva Convention rules. Soccer matches continue, work details continue, but the tone shifts. The war is no longer theoretical. Many now suspect that when repatriation comes, Germany will not resemble the nation they left. For some, Arizona becomes the first place they imagine a future, not as conquerors, but as citizens somewhere else. Years later, former POWs will recall that democracy didn't arrive as a lecture. It arrived as consistency.
When the war ends, repatriation begins. German POWs are returned to a country in ruins, cities flattened, infrastructure shattered, food scarce. Many speak carefully about their captivity in America, if they speak at all. Some are not believed. Stories of abundant meals, medical care, and educational programs sound implausible, even offensive, to those who suffered bombing and starvation. To claim humane treatment by the enemy feels almost like betrayal. And yet, the memories persist. For a small number, they become motivation. Education resumes. Careers are rebuilt. The war, for them, ends not with surrender, but with comparison.
Years pass. Then something unexpected happens. Former POWs return, voluntarily. Some study medicine, others engineering. A few settle permanently in the American Southwest, becoming doctors, surgeons, professionals, and eventually American citizens. Arizona is no longer a prison. It is home. They remember the desert, the silence, the canyon, and the moment they realized the war was lost, not on the battlefield, but in capacity. The most effective victory, they would later say, wasn't achieved with bombs. It was achieved by proving that an enemy could be treated as a future neighbor. The treatment of German POWs in the United States was not accidental. By 1944, America held more than 425,000 Axis prisoners in camps across the country. Arizona alone hosted several large facilities. The policy was deliberate, grounded in the 1929 Geneva Convention. But there was another calculation. American planners understood something Germany did not. How a nation treats its enemies becomes part of the war itself. Humane treatment reduced unrest. It encouraged cooperation. It undermined enemy propaganda more effectively than censorship ever could. Camp Papago Park was not designed to impress prisoners. It was designed to function efficiently, predictably, humanely.
And in doing so, it exposed the contrast between ideology and reality. German prisoners arrived in America already conditioned. They had been told that the United States was chaotic, culturally shallow, dependent on exaggeration. So when confronted with abundance, their first instinct was not belief, but suspicion. Propaganda had trained them well. The irony is that the American system did not require persuasion. There were no grand speeches explaining democracy, no effort to convert. The system simply operated. Meals arrived on time, rules were followed, punishments were consistent and limited. For men trained to expect brutality, this absence of spectacle was unsettling and ultimately convincing. Years later, former prisoners would describe the Grand Canyon not with awe, but precision. They remembered the cold wind, the silence, the absence of barriers. It wasn't beauty that struck them most. It was scale. The canyon didn't feel symbolic. It felt indifferent, older than nations, untouched by war. For men raised on controlled narratives and staged imagery, this mattered. It was the moment when doubt became certainty, not about the canyon, about everything else they had been told.
Understanding without celebration. The Great Papago Escape did not end with punishment or humiliation. It ended with understanding. The prisoners were not defeated by guards, weapons, or force. They were defeated by logistics, by geography, by reality. For Werner Krauss and others like him, the war's outcome became clear not through surrender documents, but through comparison. A country capable of feeding its enemies during total war was not pretending. It was winning. Quietly. From a military standpoint, the Great Papago Escape was insignificant. No intelligence was gained. No strategic assets were threatened. All escapees were recovered. Yet U.S. Army reports noted something unusual. The escape demonstrated that belief systems, not fences, were the real point of failure. The prisoners did not underestimate guards. They underestimated environment. They assumed rivers would flow because books showed them flowing. They assumed distance could be overcome because ideology demanded it. The desert did not care. For American officers, the lesson was simple. Reality is the most effective counter-propaganda tool there is. Colonel Lewis K. Holden, commander of Camp Papago Park, rarely spoke publicly about the escape. There was no desire to dramatize it. His approach to command was procedural, not ideological. Rules were enforced, standards maintained, prisoners treated predictably. Holden believed discipline came from consistency, not fear. When asked years later about the Grand Canyon trip, he reportedly responded with a single sentence: "They needed to see what was real." No speeches followed, no explanations. The lesson was allowed to stand on its own. For many prisoners, the hardest part came later. Returning to post-war Germany meant reintegration into a society struggling with defeat, scarcity, and disbelief. Some remained silent about their captivity. Others spoke carefully. A few tried to explain that America's strength had not been cruelty, but structure. Often they were dismissed, but the experience lingered. Men who had once accepted propaganda unquestioningly became cautious consumers of information. They had learned that disbelief can be as dangerous as blind faith. By the 1950s and 1960s, the transformation was visible. Former POWs reappeared, this time by choice. They enrolled in American universities, entered medical schools, built practices. Some settled in Arizona, the same landscape that had once defeated them. They did not romanticize captivity, but they remembered fairness. And fairness, over time, became loyalty. For some German prisoners, the war did not end on May 7, 1945. It ended earlier, at the rim of the Grand Canyon, in a mess hall on Christmas Day, in the silence of a dry riverbed. Not with surrender papers, but with understanding. They had not escaped into freedom. They had escaped into truth. The Great Papago Escape occupies only a few pages in U.S. Army records. No medals were awarded, no courts-martials followed, no monuments were built. Compared to the scale of World War II, it was a minor incident. Yet historians later returned to it, not for what it changed militarily, but for what it revealed psychologically. It showed how completely belief can shape perception, and how fragile that belief becomes when confronted with reality. The prisoners did not lose faith in Germany all at once. They lost it incrementally, one dry riverbed at a time. America never intended Camp Papago Park to be a demonstration. There were no tours for journalists, no speeches for prisoners. But abundance has its own language. It does not persuade. It does not argue. It simply continues. Meals arrived whether prisoners believed in them or not. The system functioned whether it was trusted or not. And slowly, inevitably, doubt shifted direction, not toward America, but toward everything the prisoners had been told about it.
The Grand Canyon did not teach ideology. It offered no message. It simply existed, vast, indifferent, unchanged by war. For men raised to believe that power must be staged and exaggerated, this mattered. The canyon did not need explanation. And in that silence, something else collapsed, the idea that everything must be a lie. Sometimes, reality is just larger than belief.
Long after the war, former prisoners built ordinary lives. Doctors, engineers, citizens. Some spoke of Arizona with fondness. Others rarely mentioned it. But none forgot the moment when the narrative broke. Not because they were convinced, but because they were allowed to observe. The war did not end with hatred. For some, it ended with clarity.
The Great Papago Escape was not a failure of security. It was a failure of disbelief. The prisoners did not escape into freedom. They escaped into exposure. Exposure to geography, to logistics, to a system that did not need to boast. In the end, the most powerful moment of the story was not the tunnel, not the surrender, not even the canyon. It was the realization that sometimes propaganda is not a lie. Sometimes it is simply the truth you refuse to believe. Stories like this rarely make headlines. They don't end with victory parades or surrender documents. But they reveal how wars are really decided, quietly, through systems, values, and reality itself. If you value historically accurate stories told without exaggeration, stories that respect the intelligence of the viewer, consider subscribing. This channel exists to preserve the moments history almost forgot. Thank you for watching.